So next item, we have an item on here, Member Armino Pruitt, regarding access to investigation files, where you suggested and brought this up, suggested at the last meeting that we look into this. You also brought this up at our policy and procedures subcommittee meeting, and I wasn't sure of how you wanted to proceed with this, so I put it on the agenda, and I would leave it to you to tell us, instruct us how you want to proceed with this.
Thank you, Dr. Cass. So from the reason this came up was because Member Nixon had inquired about being able to see some OBRD footage from a case and was told that we'd have to have a vote on it at the next meeting to allow it. And then that would mean it would be another month before the vote on the case. I guess that case would be, held over, tabled until the next meeting. And so I thought we should have a discussion about what materials we're allowed to have with and without a vote. So what do we have to do if we want more materials, and can we codify that in a way that makes sense to all members, current and future?
The policies are pretty straightforward. Once there's been a completed investigation and a recommendation comes before you, you have 3 steps you can take. You can accept the recommendation. You can come up with your own recommendation based upon a review of the investigative file, or you can send it back for more investigation. Beyond that, when an investigation is completed from the CPOA, you can vote to have access to the file to review it.
Okay, did you not just say that we could, one of the 3 options was that we could access the investigative file and offer an alternative, right?
Mm-hmm,
so
yes.
In that case, how is that not what was done and requested and refused previously? Did we not have a case in front of us? A member said, I'd like to see the OBRD, and was told you'd have to vote on it at the next meeting.
Yep, you have to vote as a board.
For OBRD? For OBRD?
No, for access to the investigation file.
Okay, so what can we ask? So if we've got a case in front of us and we're curious, because what we're asked to do basically is we're given the complaint letter and we're given the findings letter. And so then if before we're voting on the appropriateness of the finding, and we want to look at some information about the case, what is our avenue there? What is available to us at that point?
You can make a motion to...
Without the vote. I'm just asking, in that case, before the vote, we have access to only those 2 pieces of information only.
That's correct.
Okay. So what would we need to do then? Where in our policies and procedures would we need to? Because I don't see anything that addresses this in our policies and procedures unless I'm missing it, and that's entirely possible. But where would we need to change something if the will of the board is to change it? Is it in the section that I read, or is there another section that addresses this?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armino Pruitt, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Are you asking for individuals to independently decide that they want to review an investigative file?
I'm asking for any board member or all board members for the materials to be made available upon request from the agency when we have cases before us. So if something sounds, raises a lot of questions for us in the process when we're looking at the complaint letter versus the response, can we just change our policies and the result be that a board member can say, can the OBRD for this case be made available to all board members without a board vote?
No.
Okay, so I feel like last time in this meeting when I asked this question, I was told, yeah, rewrite the policy and bring it back to us and we'll talk about it. Was I not told that?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armio Pruitt, what I'm saying is that you can't act independently. You as a board have to decide that you want to review aspects of an investigation.
I'm asking, can we change our policies to allow for a member to request that any board member be allowed access to OBRD upon request? I don't think you can. You have to operate as a board. You're a body. Okay, as it is now, things are made available to us at different times and not everybody looks at them and we all come together and discuss them. So if it's made available to all and it's up to each individual to decide if they're going to look at that, how is that acting individually?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armio Pruitt, whatever board decides to do as an individual behavior to review something or not to review something, that's one thing. But there was a predicate vote by the board to review those materials. That's the point.
You're muted.
I'm muted.
Sorry. Is having it on an agenda where we're all in agreement that the case under review is under review by the whole board, isn't that an agreement in and of itself that we're reviewing that case?
Your Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armio Pruitt, you're reviewing what's being presented to you as part of the agenda, but the policies and procedures, which are from the ordinance, state what your rights are or how you are to handle the completed investigation.
Okay, so can you help me find them in the policies and procedures that address this? Because like I said, it says we can request personnel files that will be redacted. We can vote to request Garrity materials, and then we have to keep Garrity materials confidential. Those are the 3 points, A, B, and C, that I found there under investigative materials. And like I said, there may be another section that's appropriate and addresses all of this, but I don't know what it is. And so it doesn't, I'm sorry, it looks like Ms. Gooch has some input here.
Yes, Ms. Gooch, I would, yes. And then we'll get to board member questions and comments after we hear from council.
I did not mean to interrupt you, Member Armio Pruitt. I'm sorry. And thank you, Chair Dr. Cass. In answer to, I think, one of Member Armio Pruitt's overarching questions, in your policies and procedures on page 14, which is a different section than what you and Director Harness have been talking about, there is a provision that talks about access to APD documents, and that is different than the confidential documents in the other investigation section that addresses Garrity. So that provision allows for reasonable access for the board and the agency and Director Harness upon reasonable notice. But the overlay, I think that what Director Harness is talking about is how the board gets to that point where it's wanting to review those additional documents. And where that part of it is what Director Harness has laid out, which is when a case comes before the board, you have the recommendations. And if you have those questions or you want to see something more, the board then is empowered to take a vote to ask for that additional information before voting on the final recommendation. But it is not thought of in your policies to be an individual process for board members to take prior to that review in front of the whole board on the policies and recommendations. I hope that answers the questions about what you get to see and when you get to see it. The other items you're talking about that are not subject to Garrity, they don't have the same confidentiality requirements associated, but we still want to act as a board and make sure that there's no independent investigation going on by board members. there's a provision. Let me find the section. So the board review provisions start on page 16 of your policies and procedures. And what it says is that, and it's basically what Director Harness has laid out, which is that the board should review the findings and recommendations at a properly noticed meeting, and that for that review, there's 3 requirements of the board. One is to remain impartial and abstain from any independent investigation or review of information not presented by the investigation report or within the investigation file. 2, refrain from ex parte communications with anyone involved in the case. And 3, refrain from prejudgment of the complaint before it's heard by the board. After that process happens, the board can then approve the findings, approve other findings as supported by the investigation file, defer the matter to allow for further investigation or analysis, and then a couple others regarding editing, proofreading, and ask that the findings be returned. And I think where your question's coming from, Member Armijo Pruitt, is what is included in the investigation file.
Right.
And what is that? And I would say that I don't know. I think that Director Harness is the expert when it comes to what is part of the findings and recommendations and what is part of the investigation file and what is not.
Because the way I'm reading what you just, thank you, Ms. Gooch, very much for that. I appreciate the redirection on where to find that. So reading that now, though, it does make me wonder, remain impartial in deliberations and decisions and abstain from any independent investigation or review of information not presented by the investigative report or within the investigation file. So the way I read that, and maybe I'm incorrect, is if it's in the investigation file, we can review it. Is that not what it says?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt, no one's disputing that. I'm simply saying that you have to do it as a board vote. You can't send me an email demanding portions of an investigation file as an independent board member. You need to act as one. That's my only point. Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas, I'll make 2 points. You are a deliberative body to evaluate evidence as a body and not as individuals. So you're a deliberative body to evaluate. You are a board. You are not acting as individuals. Secondly, the blanket permission, as you're proposing it, would no way meet the specificity as outlined under the OMA for an action. I guess I'm really struggling with the fact that it's already in your policies and procedures. If you have a case that you want to review the file, you can vote to do so when it's on the agenda.
Member Armijo Pruitt.
Well, I would argue that that's germane to what's on the agenda, because if those cases are on the agenda, that's a germane item that you may have a request related to those cases. I don't think that falls.
Exactly, and then you can vote to review the file.
Yes, but currently your suggestion is that we have to wait an additional month to properly notice that request, and then no. So you're saying we can vote tonight to request on what we have tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
Where in our policies and procedures does it lay out that if we want part of the investigative file, we need to vote on it as a board to request that?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt, you are a board. I don't know how else to say it more fundamentally, that you are a board and you must vote to take action.
We do not vote to see the complaint. We do not vote to see the findings letter, because those are made available to all of us to review. And some people may choose to review all of them, and some people may not. Because I've certainly been on here where people have not looked at some of these things, right? So then we are all having access to that information, and then we are voting as a board. We're discussing as a board the issues that we see. This is not an independent action. It's being informed within the scope of our procedures. So what I'm asking for is, you just said that within our policies and procedures, it lays out the process for doing this appropriately with a board vote. And I'm asking where that is.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt, Attorney Gooch just reviewed those provisions with me.
She did, and it didn't say that there was a vote needed. That's my point. I just read board review B. She read out loud. I reiterated it. Remain impartial in deliberations and decisions, and abstain from any independent investigation or review of information not presented by the investigation report or within the investigation file. An independent investigation in this case would be going outside of what is put together by the agency. That's what it reads to me. It's saying that you are not to go outside of that information. But that information isn't being made available to us without coming together to have a board vote on the evening where we're supposed to discuss these things. And then, because we see the agenda is set and posted, right? And then we have to, then we get access to the 2 pieces of information on SharePoint. And then we'd have to come together and say, oh, by the way, instead of voting on this, let's table this one, because I would like for us to vote that we all be able to see the OBRD on this. And then the next month, we would then have access to that OBRD and we could vote on that case. To me, it feels like it's unnecessarily extending the timelines on these where we already have a problem on timelines. And I do not see, this seems very explicit to me, this B1 under board review. 6B1 seems like it's saying we have access to the investigation report and the investigation file as part of our review.
Okay, I'll let you draw another breath and I'll recognize Member Mitchell.
I kind of agree. I think that once the documents are presented to us to vote on, that if we want additional information as an individual board member, we should just be able to go back to the agency and say, this isn't clear to me. Can I see this document, or can I see this video without delaying the discussion? I don't really see why that's a problem, and I don't see that as doing an independent investigation, because you're really discussing information that's already been presented for consideration. So that's my 2 cents.
And I recognize Member Nixon.
And I'll be honest with you, I don't see how we can, as a board even, or individuals, or however you want to call it, can say we're doing an investigation when the very people that we're investigating are providing the materials for us. But so be it, those are the only materials we have at hand. Member Armijo Pruitt's point, and the point of getting this done, is if we need to make a change to our policies and procedures, I'm all for it. And if that means changing our policies and procedures, so be it. But since, and correct me if I'm wrong, Member Armijo Pruitt, but there may have been some sort of motion that you were going to come up with for us to vote on to kind of go down that line. I'm all for it, because we need to change something. It's not acceptable to continue doing investigations the way we're doing it. We don't have enough of the information. How do we get that?
Well, Chair Dr. Cass and Member Nixon, let's be clear. The board's not doing investigations. You're right. You're reviewing.
You're right. Analysis.
You're reviewing the work of the agency.
You're so right.
Okay,
So analysis.
Let's be clear about that, and let's make that distinction.
Agreed.
Because you're not doing investigations. You're not interviewing people. You're not doing investigations. You're reviewing.
I disagree with you. I don't have any argument with what you're saying.
Okay. So let's make that distinction first off. Let's focus on the operative word, the board. Not board member, it's the board. And the concept that I can't get beyond is that you have to act as a body. And so are you saying that for every investigation, we must automatically make the entire investigation file available? Is that what you're going at?
Honestly, my preference, yes, would be exactly that. That when we go to SharePoint and we look up, CPC 19, whatever, that, yeah, all the materials there and anybody can look at them within the board, and then they are fodder for discussion and decision making at the board meeting. That would be my first choice. And should that not be the will of the board, then an alternative would be that upon request, they're made available. And if any one board member requests them, they're made available on SharePoint for all board members to access. I think we do need to have some wording around this in our policies and procedures document, even though personally, I don't feel like there's anything here excluding us right now from already having that be, we're not restricted from what I can see here from having these things made available to everyone. Is the complaint or the concern on your part, Director Harness, does it have to do with agency time? Is it because this isn't about individual members. This is about board members being informed enough to play their appropriate role as part of a whole board in making decisions. And so I would not advocate for anyone to do any personal investigating of anything, but reviewing the investigative file is a different thing entirely. So, I mean, my request my wish list would be that every one of the cases that we look at on SharePoint has the file there so that we can look at the police report and we can look at OBRD at will.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt. So let's just go back a couple of months and let's look at how case review decided that they thought they didn't want to be in the position of where they're reviewing individual cases because it was too burdensome. So it wasn't.
That was not.
Well, please.
Okay.
Because you didn't want to be in the position of doing investigations and reviewing investigations.
No.
Now, the board is supposed to spend a majority of its time on policy. And so you're wanting to dive into these individual investigations, yet there's been no discussion of what happened at the amici meeting with APD, which is the body that you're to be overseeing. You have professionals in the CPOA that do investigations and do work. The board has not considered, has not talked about, has not reviewed anything that happened at the compliance meeting with the department, which are
None of that is what we're talking about right now, Director Harness. So stop smoke and mirroring it.
No, and stop interrupting
out
me.
lying about what happened.
I am not. Oh, okay.
You
so
are.
now I'm a liar.
The CRC did not do that.
Member
No, I'm
Galloway,
sorry, Dr. Cass. You have
Member Galloway, you don't have
all
the floor.
evening.
Member Galloway, you don't have the floor.
Dr. Cass,
Member
that is
Galloway,
because you refuse to acknowledge that I am a member of this board.
I'm.
And there are several
I'm
people who have watched you ignore me.
And I've recognized board members as I find them able to be recognized. So
If you choose to admittedly
at the moment you do not have the floor. So continue, member Armijo Pruitt.
Okay, so the characterization that the CRC did not want to review, it was too burdensome to review individual cases, is an inaccuracy. I do believe I started that conversation that led to the change into an audit process by talking about the redundancy of our efforts for the whole board versus the committee itself. So there was never a discussion that I was a part of for CRC. Maybe you're invoking something that's before my time, which sometimes seems to happen when you invoke something before my time and then there's never any follow-up on what that actually means. But in my experience on that committee, that was never been the complaint. That is not why the committee switched to a different modality. And which in fact was to switch to be more in depth in looking at cases, right? That audit process is much more than what we're talking about it doing previously. And then this idea that we're trying to do the job of the agency by doing what is clearly put in this and the ordinance is within our realm to do. It does feel to me like originally I was told, in fact, I know it was told to me by you, that we would have access to materials in order to assess the review process, the investigative process, right? That we're supposed to assess the investigations. We're supposed to vote on the findings of the investigations. And you wanted to hobble us and have us do that with complaints and with findings letters, that we can't comment on the findings letters format because that's micromanaging. And if we ask for information, it's all kicked down the line. I brought this up last month, was told that we couldn't do this. You told me in the beginning of this discussion that we can't change these policies to do this. And then we look at them, and what it actually says is the investigative file is part of what we're allowed to review. So I feel like you're mischaracterizing what it is I'm proposing we do. I understand that we are a full board. I do not want to do anything as an individual. I'm not just looking to get my thrills looking at different cases. I'm looking to be fully informed. And mischaracterizing the history of this board or the committee feels like smoke and mirrors. And Dr. Cass, last month you did acknowledge explicitly that you had seen Member Galloway's hand raised and were choosing to ignore it.
I'm sorry, but if that's your characterization, that's not the way that's not what I intended.
That was verbatim what you said.
I've recognized you in as fair a way as I can do. I think that it's incumbent on me to make sure that all board members have an opportunity to speak. And so I'm trying to assure that that's the case.
I think you and I can have a sideline conversation.
I still do have the floor, and I believe constant interruptions are a mode of operation that I'd like to change so that we do this in a more orderly fashion. And if it means having to wait longer than you'd like, then I'm sorry that's the way it's going to be. But if you have something to say, I'll recognize you now. I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Dr. Cass, and you and I can finish that particular conversation on the side. Director Harness, the request for CRC to move to more of an audit function came from you. You asked for us to do that. The investigative staff asked for us to do that because there was an acknowledgement that the board was making findings based solely on complaints and finding letters and not looking at the investigative file. That was a problem. The solution to that, with the understanding that it was highly unlikely that the entirety of the board would even be bothered to look at the findings letter and the complaint, much less the full investigative file, was to move CRC to an audit function. We tailored that to your request and that of the agency. It was a part of that conversation where Dr. Cass and I were the only board members to show up to have the agency have the facilitated discussion with us. That was the genesis of CRC as an audit function. So coming to this body at this time and suggesting anything otherwise is an out and out fallacy.
The chair recognizes the member Armijo Pruitt.
Thank you. Okay, so I present this motion that where it reads on page 16D, I would propose that we amend it to read as part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below, along with the proposed findings and recommendations. I don't know how we are going to solve this problem. It's got to be Ed working with city IT or whatever in his office to figure out how best to do this. But there are so many options. Technology is just not that, it's not that big of a barrier. I think if it's put it on a bunch of thumb drives and we go pick them up, or it's get the link made, or it's evidence.com, but I guarantee you the city of Albuquerque is capable of this. And the idea that it says right there, both in the ordinance and in our policies, that this is made available, this is part of our review, but we're being told no. So I think the first step is to put it in policy in an explicit way, in a more explicit way than it exists. And then we work moving forward on how to make that happen. But that the expectation is that the work to be done to make it happen happens. So that's my motion. I mean.
All right. So just for clarity, would you repeat your motion, please?
As part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below, along with the proposed findings and recommendations. It's in the chat box, if anyone wants to read along.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Discussion. Have we had enough discussion? All right. I see no further discussion.
Chantal has her hand up.
I really don't know how to make that any clearer.
Well, you usually have your hand up over here.
I'm sorry. I thought we weren't interrupting. Was that a thing? Tara, do we need to put in there, since you have the proposed findings and recommendations, do we need to also clarify the complaint? So it's the complaint, the investigative file, just so there's no confusion in the future? Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted. Yeah.
There I go. I start chewing ice and I think mute, so that you all don't hear it. And then I forget that I put it on mute. Okay. Yeah, if we say as part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below, along with the complaint, comma, the proposed findings and recommendations.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt. So when is this supposed to happen?
Well, it looks like it was already supposed to be happening from what I can tell from the policy. So I don't know. I mean, that would be at your best effort to make it happen as soon as possible. I mean, we can put it in there immediately.
Not my question. My question is, what's going to trigger this request?
So what this says is nothing triggers a request. This is part of the process.
When the investigation is complete, or when the case?
At the point when we are asked to review the complaint and the findings letter, and those things are made available to us, this would also be made available to us. Right? So it's like at the point when we are told, here are the cases that you need to review and be ready to vote on the findings for when you come to the next meeting. At that point, we should also have that information.
So in other words, when it appears on the agenda, then an individual board member can contact the agency and say, I want to see this investigation file.
No, it would be what this is saying is it will be made available to us as a matter of course. Remember when you asked, what did I want? And I said, yes, that's exactly what I want. It's that as those things are made available to us as a matter of standard operating procedure, the complaint and the findings letter as it is now would also have the investigative file made available.
So we're going to be posting every investigation file as the investigation is completed.
Sounds right.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm opposed to this. I think that the board already is positioned in that it's overworked. And in my opinion, the focus of the board is completely misguided in this area. And my smoke and mirrors, as described before, when describing that the members of the board have no idea what took place with the Albuquerque Police Department last week with its stakeholders meetings and its purview of what they're supposed to be doing with the Albuquerque Police Department, along with reviewing officer-involved shootings and serious use of force cases, and now reviewing every individual investigation that comes before it. I don't think that that's practical.
Member Mia Pruitt.
I would counter that if we're ill-informed on the things that are on the agenda for you to present and give us updates on, that is, I'm not sure what to say about that. So if, as you brought up the list of things that you feel like we're ill-informed about, I would beseech you to help us be better informed in the future.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt, it's not ill-informed, it's uninformed in that there's no participation in those meetings by board members.
So, Member Galloway.
Meetings that take place at a specific time are sometimes not easily joinable. It's not always the easiest. I know that sometimes this gets lost, but this is your job. And this is our volunteer time that we do outside of our job. So we can fit in these cases as best we can at 11 o'clock at night, not when there's an amici meeting going on at 9:30 during our business hour. So I think that's an important thing to note. I would also remind you that we are talking about for this last quarter, we're talking like 7 cases. This is not going to be that much extra time for us. I know that this is a fluke right now, and we may be sorry that we've done this down the line, but right now is a really good time for us to get in the groove and get in the process of reviewing the cases that you guys have asked us to do for at least a year. I would be willing to bet it was longer than that. So now you have a board who is actually wanting collectively to do the things that you have asked us to do. It's not even just an audit function of the case review committee. We are all asking for this to be made available to us. It seems like it ought to be a win-win.
Any other, I'm sorry, Member Olivas.
I really want to support this, but I'm not sure that, I don't know how we get to a place where this isn't a tremendous burden on the agency who we are trying to advocate for so that they can meet their deadlines. And, you know, I agree with Member Armijo Pruitt that the technology excuse may be just that, an excuse, but I don't think we have a full understanding of what it could entail here and what we could be asking for or imposing on the agency. I'm really conflicted about this. I really don't know how I'm going to vote because I really see that there's an issue here, but at the same time, I think that we need to, I wish that we had a partner at the agency that was talking to us about how we can get this done in a way that doesn't decimate the agency rather than saying, no, we can't do it, which clearly, I think we've established, based on our reading and our legal counsel's reading of the ordinance and our own policies and procedures, we have the authority to ask for this for every case. I'm not sure that that's a good idea, but it sounds like because we don't have cooperation from the agency at this point, that's where we're going to go. And that's very concerning to me because we're not partnering here, and I think we need a partner, and I just don't see it. So I appreciate both sides of what's happening here, and this is a tough one.
Member Nixon.
I think this is exactly where we need to go, and this is exactly what we need to ask for. I think that there are some evolutions that need to take place in this process, and this is one of those. I don't see anything technologically that is going to hamper in any way, shape, or form having files, and whether they're documents or files or camera videos moved around in processes that we already have available to us. I'm not buying that. I think that this is very doable at this point, and I think that we are also a flexible enough board to where if the agency does run into some sort of issues or problems with being able to fulfill this, then we can talk about it at that time. But I think it's absolutely necessary that we vote on this and pass this through so that we can get to the next phase and become more efficient. I'm sorry, there's no excuse for not having this. Thank you.
Member Armijo Pruitt.
I do not want to hamper the agency or tie up their resources, but I do feel like I routinely ask for things and other members ask for things, and we are told no. No, that it's in your rules, you can't do it. No, you voted on this in the past, that you don't address these cases. No, no, no. And then if I stop and say, okay, let's investigate that. Let's see where that's at. It turns out it wasn't actually supposed to be that. It was, no, I don't want to do it. And so that's why it feels to me like we have to put this here now, especially while we're having few cases that are coming in front of us, to give us a chance to work this out. Because the answer per policy doesn't need to be no. But if we don't put it in here, the answer is always no. And so I think, I would want to be flexible. I would want to be reactive to the needs of the agency going forward. But I want the agency to also look at us in that same way and try and facilitate what we're trying to accomplish here. And I feel like that maybe the only way that's going to happen is if we put it in policy and then we're forced to find a solution.
And how does this further the mission of the board?
Well, it says in our procedures that we are to review these cases and the investigative file is supposed to be made available to us. So that looks to me like both the ordinance and our policies say the exact same thing, then that's part of what we need to be doing.
Yes,
and if there's other domains in which you would like to see the board more active or more built out, I think I'm all for backing you on that. I'm all for myself getting more involved. I'm all for creating some other function within a different subcommittee that maybe takes on direct things you think we should be more involved in. Absolutely. But that's not what we're voting on right now.
Member Galloway.
I would also note that as part of the findings of the audit where we only audited 2 cases, we came out of that with a policy recommendation to be sent to the Policy and Procedure Committee. So that 51% of our time came from a review of this, of the materials that we're asking for now. So I think that's how it furthers the mission of this board.
Member Olivas, you have your hand up?
Nope, I'm done.
Okay. Your blue hand is up. Is there any further discussion on this, on the motion on the floor? We did have a second, is that right? All right, so seeing no further discussion, I'll call for a roll call vote in favor of the motion that's presented by Member Armijo Pruitt. Member Armijo Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
I'm going to vote no based on I think it should be up upon request. And I also think the adage of be careful of what you're asking for, you may get it, is going to apply in this situation.
Member Nixon,
Yes.
Member Olivas,
Yes.
and the chair votes no. So motion carried 4-2.